Lost another pound? And we get to talk about Georgia this week. Hello everybody and welcome to the Honor and Knowledge channel and my weekly update for my Hungry Strike for America, where I'm losing 50 pounds starting in the beginning of July of last year by the end of October of this year, all in support of the 2026 elections. Why? I think that there's some kind of connection between my losing 50 pounds, wacky idea, I know, that there's a connection, and the House and the Senate both staying in Republican hands after the 2026 elections. So, 27 pounds down, another star on the official Hungry Strike for America sign, and I get to color in another state. And which one was that? Georgia, which is very convenient because Georgia is in the news again. I picked the state to color in based upon how they voted for President Trump in 2024. Well, Georgia is number 27. In other words, there were 26 states that had higher percentages than them. They're in number 27 spot, so they're colored in on the official United States of America map for the Hungry Strike for America. How did I do it? Well, exercising more and eating less. That's it. No medications of any kind for losing weight. I do get knee shots in one knee with hyaluronic gel, and I finished a series of 3 a couple weeks ago, and my rib that I hurt falling down against a coconut tree is basically healed. So I'm back to doing exercising properly and controlling my weight properly and sleeping really well. Those are all important for not having to use weight loss medications. Sleep, eating right, eating less, and be more active, including exercising. So moving on to Georgia. Recently, a few days ago, the Georgia Court of Appeals had an appeals panel of 3 judges that reviewed a case that had been brought to them by the Fulton County Commissioners when the Republican Party of Fulton County took them to court because the Fulton County Commissioners refused to seat Republican candidates on the elections board, contrary to the law of the state of Georgia. A federal judge ruled in favor of the Republicans and also gave a $10,000 a day fine against the commissioners. But then he stayed that fine when the commissioners appealed it to the Georgia State Supreme Court, which was the wrong step to take, was probably done in order to delay things. Because after they appealed it to the Georgia State Supreme Court, the Georgia State Supreme Court said, nope, it's got to go to the appeals court. So the Georgia State Appeals Court got the case and they forwarded it to a 3-judge panel, not the whole appeals court, and the 3-judge panel used their own understanding, not the letter of the law, not what the law intended, but their understanding of what the power of the Fulton County Commissioners were with regards to whether or not they had to accept these Republican candidates to be appointed on the elections board. Why would the Fulton County Commissioners be against both Republicans? They believe that these 2 Republicans are what would be called by them election deniers. They are people who are saying that the Fulton County Elections Board, the Fulton County election system, had some shenanigans going on during the 2020 elections. These 2 people know where the skeletons are, type of thing. The civil rights aspect of this law are very clear. In the past, when Georgia was very strong supporter of discrimination and segregation, the state was controlled by the Democrats. They were the pro-KKK party. They were the pro-slavery party. They were the pro-keep the blacks out of politics party. Well, at some point, there had to be a law passed, probably supported by the Voting Rights Act and the federal government, that required that when the commission in a county is presented with the candidates from the opposing party, they shall be appointed. That way you can't use any excuses to keep them off. I think the reason for this law was a good reason. There were probably segregationists in counties that refused to seat the Republican black representatives onto the elections board. Well, fast forward many decades. So today we consider the Democrat Party to be the party of the black community, when in reality, that's not really true. The black community goes into both parties, not requiring that the Fulton County Commissioners legally appoint these 2 Republicans to the Fulton County Elections Board is basically a violation of an important civil rights law in the state of Georgia. The appeals court is using its activist judgment, saying that, well, of course, the Fulton County Commissioners can use their power of appointing to determine whether or not these people should be appointed. The law says shall be appointed. doesn't say, think about it. This appeals court knows that they are wrong. They are doing this to delay. It is imperative that two things happen outside of the state of Georgia. One is that the Save America Act needs to be passed by the Senate, signed by Trump, so that it becomes effective soon and will help protect the sanctity of elections in Fulton County. The other thing is the Department of Justice needs to finish its investigation into the shenanigans that occurred in 2020. Since then we have found out that the Fulton County Elections Board admits that over 300,000 ballots were improperly processed back in 2020. There were many, many things that went wrong in 2020 in Fulton County with regard to elections. Here are just 3 of them, the last 3 on a long list. Why? Because nobody wants to go over all of them right now. But let's just go over these 3. These 3 items come from this report of investigation of the 2020 general election in Fulton County. This investigation and report were just published on January 6th of this year by the Election Oversight Group. Here's an overview of the whole report. On the morning of November 4th, 2020, when ballots were being scanned, Secretary of State Raffensperger appeared on the Today Show. The secretary said that a record 4.7 million Georgia voters cast a ballot for the November 3rd general election, and only 2% of the ballots were left to count. At the time, President Trump was in the lead by over 103,000 votes, and according to the secretary, there were only approximately 94,000 ballots left to count. He did not believe the outcome could change with the number of ballots remaining. And the report itself lists 26 different issues. Here's number 24. Fulton County created daily recap sheets after the election, not during the election as required by Georgia law. Indicates that they were doing something to cover up their tracks. Count number 25. Fulton County's records include 22,534 more ballots cast than voters crediting with casting of ballot. Over 148,000 absentee ballots were counted according to their records, but they only had 125,784 voters recorded. So what happened to the other 25,534 ballots? Just as a reminder, President Trump did not win Georgia, only by 11,780 votes. Something's fishy here. And count number 26, thousands of ballots are unique to either the November 3rd actual count or the recount. They're not the same in both piles. They should be identical. They're all paper ballots. Why is there a difference of thousands of ballots that are in one and not in the other? All those problems are just in Fulton County. And just as a reminder again, the Republicans, President Trump, did not win Georgia only by 11,780 votes. And also again, remember that the Fulton County Election Board itself a few months ago admitted that they processed 315,000 votes improperly in 2020. As you can see, Fulton County is a problem. All elections in Fulton County being done by the same people, being done using the same processes, are certainly filled with problems. It was obvious to me right after the 2020 elections, and obvious to me now more so because of the stuff I've read from this investigation. There were shenanigans, a nice word, shenanigans that went on in Fulton County, which desperately need to be understood and stopped in the 2026 elections. Senator Ossif and probably Senator Warnock should never have been elected. President Trump should have won Georgia. Everything's going to come out soon, but the question is how soon? Because if it comes out too late, it won't help us in 2026 in Fulton County. We do not need to beat Senator Ossif to keep a majority in the Senate after the 2026 elections. But he's a terrible senator. He's not good for our country. He's not good for Georgia. And this is just the right time to replace him with a Republican. So we need the Save America Act. We need the Department of Justice to finish their investigation. And number 3, we need Georgia State Supreme Court or the Appeals Court or the Georgia Senate or the legislature, somebody, the Georgia governor, somebody in Georgia, be an adult, somebody in Georgia who is in a position to be able to act with regards to this terrible situation, anti-civil rights. needs to get involved. For example, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which used to be a good organization. In fact, just in October of 2025, they filed a case for a different county. The Southern Poverty Law Center said that 32% of that county were blacks, and yet there were no blacks on the county commission. Well, I disagree with what the Southern Poverty Law Center is saying, and I disagree with the basis. But I will say that the Southern Poverty Law Center is active. Why don't they want to support the civil rights of somebody that possibly doesn't look like them? Why don't they want to support right against wrong? Why don't they want to support equal voting rights for everybody? If you do, this is the primary place to do it. The Southern Poverty Law Center could be one of the ones that gets involved, but they're not going to. Why not? Because they're Democrat, and they know that the Democrat Party is in a death spiral right now. I believe that the only thing keeping the Democrat Party alive right now is, how can I say this, bad stuff. So the Southern Poverty Law Center has an opportunity to regain some relevance and to regain some honor. But you know what? I'm not holding my breath for that one. So there you go, my friends. Lost another pound, got to add another star, got to color another state. We talked about Georgia. Georgia's a problem. Fulton County is a disaster. We need the state of Georgia to look into itself and to realize that they are wrong. They are morally wrong. They are legally wrong. It is a terrible situation, and they should be royally ashamed of themselves. And then lastly, the Save America Act. That needs to be passed by the Senate. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching this. Thank you, my friends. God bless you. God bless President Trump and his administration. God bless the wonderful men and women of the United States military and all of the members of the Department of Homeland Security that are working without pay right now. I just can't imagine the stress and the problems that they're going through because the Senate Democrats are such a terrible group of people. Terrible, including Senator Ossif from Georgia and Warnock. Thank you for watching the Honor and Knowledge channel. Goodbye.